Good afternoon to our guests from India and good evening to all our guests from Australia. It gives me immense pleasure to have you all at the Australian book launch of Bose, the Untold Story of the Inconvenient Nationalist. As a part of AHA's objectives, we would like to take this opportunity to promote this very important piece of work on our beloved Netaji. As we all know, for over 7 decades, the history of India has struggled to be, to be shown as the way it should have been. But the times have changed, and all thanks to the efforts of the scholars like Chandrachurji himself, that people have now changed their way they perceive the Indian history. India has attained its freedom through the sacrifices of many revolutionaries who find a very little place in the history books. To add to that, I would just like to highlight one very important conversation between the former Prime Minister Clement Attlee, who signed the Indian Independence Act, and between the then Governor of Bengal, Justice B.B. Chakrabarti. When he asked Sir Attlee that what was Mahatma Gandhi's influence on the Indian independence, to which he replied, MINIMAL. So I'm sure this is quite an interesting fact, historic fact, and to know more such about the Indian history, I would now like to hand over to Amendraji, our president of AHA, so that he can introduce Chandrachurji further and carry on the event. Thank you. Over to you, Amendraji.
Namaste. Chandrachur Ghosh ji holds a Master of Science degree from the University of Sussex. He has studied and worked in many disciplines over more than 2 decades. This has included areas such as air pollution, food safety, agriculture, renewable energy, mining, infrastructure development, consumer expenditure, and economic development. But plainly, his overriding passion has always been to find out the truth about Netaji Subhas Chandra Bose. In 2005, Chandrachurji, along with Shri Anuj Dhar, who is also present with us, and other friends, formed a pressure group called Mission Netaji. This group set out about generating public awareness about official secrecy matters on matters relating to Netaji. As a result of their efforts, over 10,000 pages of secret documents relating to Netaji were declassified in 2010. In 2019, Chandrachurji, with Shri Anuj Dhar, published his first book on Netaji. The book, titled Conundrum, Subhas Bose's Life After Death, explored whether Netaji had indeed died on 18 August 1945 or lived on till 1985. Today, we'll launch Chandrachurji's magnum opus titled Bose, the Untold Story of an Inconvenient Nationalist. This book is a biography of Netaji. It is meticulously researched, easy to read, and contains a wealth of hitherto unknown information about Netaji. I just want to read this extract from the back cover of the book. Whilst Winston Churchill's Special Operations Executive wanted Subhas to be assassinated, later Lord Wavell, the Viceroy of India, wanted Subhas to be disposed of outside India. And Home Minister Francis Mudie explored the possibilities of having him hanged at the end of the war. You will find out shortly why the British were so afraid of Netaji. I commend you all who have an interest in learning about the true history of Bharat to purchase and read the book. Thank you.
Thank you, Amendraji.
Thank you, Amendraji, for the wonderful introduction. I would now like to move on to our next speaker, Mr. Partho Banerjee. Parthoji is working as an executive general manager at one of the Australia's leading bank and is also the orchestrator of Utsav Melbourne Association, popularly known as UMA, that conducts a lot of key Bengali Indian festivals. and is also engaged into a lot of philanthropic activities across Australia. Pathoji is a true Bengali at heart and likes to share his heritage history with his fellow Australians, and is also an avid follower of Netaji and his work towards independence. I would now like to hand over to Mr. Partho Banerjee.
I hope you can hear me. Just a quick mic check. Namaskar.
Yeah.
Namaskar. Good afternoon, good evening to all, depending on where you are joining us from. Thanks, Bharti ji. Thanks, Amendra ji, for inviting me to this launch and for placing upon me this very serious responsibility of being a humble spokesperson on behalf of the Bengali community. I would like to extend a warm welcome and felicitate Chandrachud Babu for his works on Netaji thus far and so courageously broaching what is indeed a very inconvenient topic, no pun intended, filled with riddles, controversies, and of course, a lot of patriotic emotion. The name Netaji is quite deep-rooted within our hearts and minds of every Bengali, irrespective of our beliefs or backgrounds. This one name fills the hearts of the quintessential Bengali with several emotions, those of pride, joy, grief, and a sense of lack of closure. And there is where the amazing Chandrachud Babu comes in, and through a significant body of work that he has so painstakingly undertaken, helps demystify the various myths associated with Netaji, his ideologies, his action, his motivation, and that of several other so lesser known political leaders and freedom fighters from yesteryears. This to me, and I'm sure I'm speaking on behalf of definitely the Bengalis and most Indians, have allowed us for the first time in our lives to be able to inch to a degree of closure that we all have been craving for decades and dare I say for generations. Chandrachud Babu's latest book, as well as his previous creations, is a must-have within our libraries or bookshelves, both at home and within our hearts. More importantly, I would like to perhaps humbly encourage fellow Bengalis and Indians to pass this down to our children so that they too can feel part of our glorious culture and political history. With this, I now appreciate I'm standing in this awkward position between you and Chandrachud Babu's speeches. So without further ado, may I hand over the microphone back to Bharti ji for the main session to begin. But before I go on to do that, I would like to once again congratulate Chandrachud Babu for his works, both through the book that his previous creations and the current ones, and humbly encourage him to keep up the great work that he's been doing for us all. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Banerjee, for your wonderful and for your kind words. I would now like to invite Chandrachudji himself and hand over the floor to him. Before we all move ahead, I wanted to please request you all to be muted at all times so that we can continue with the smooth functioning of our event uninterrupted. And we'll also take the question answers from both Chandrachudji and Anujji who is present between us today. And owing to the time constraints, I would all request you to please put in your questions into the chat and we can take them one by one. Thank you. Over to you, Chandrachudji.
Thank you, Bhartiji, and thank you very much for organizing this book release. It's an honor, and yeah, many of you already have it. I'm really grateful for you for organizing this book release for Australian audience and readership. And I won't get into a lecture, just a few words, just a few introductory words to give you the background as to where we stand, what we have been doing, and why we are doing it, and what we are looking at. So I'm not going to tell you the story of Netaji Subhas Chandra Bose. Most of you know it. The reason for doing this book is writing this book has been, there have been two reasons primarily. Firstly, when we started working on the Netaji mystery, which Anuj, me, and our other friends in Mission Netaji started way back in 2005. Before that, Anuj himself had done a significant amount of work. So, frankly speaking, he has been the central string holder around whom we built up our campaign and subsequent body of work. We know much more. We have much more information than what we had in 2004-5. But the starting point was there. In fact, on a lighter note, I keep telling people that uh, my association with Anuj and others in Mission Netaji is just a few months younger than my association with my wife. So it's often a clash between family life and the passion that we all follow. And it's not an easy thing to do. But since we have been working on the disappearance mystery, have been focusing on that exclusively, we have also been studying, learning about Netaji himself. And things that were not told to us, things that were not written in standard biographies. And mind it, there have been a very few very good biographies. Even then, there were so many aspects of his personality, of his activities around the world, in India and around the world. And still, there were questions, there were gaps which were not addressed. We came to realize that this was uh, inconvenient to the establishment, to the powers that be, to the academic scholars, because of their political inclinations and their family linkages. There were certain things which were not to be spoken of. So I decided to write the biography way back in 2012, but then because of our consistent engagement with just resolving the mystery, which took a significant leap from around 2013-14, and then we had to spend a lot of time in Uttar Pradesh, traveling around, meeting people, then writing Conundrum and helping produce the movie Gumnami. So didn't get the time. So finally, I sat down last year, early last year, and finished the book by the end of the year. And that's why that's how we are here. The second reason for writing this book is that most people, a lot of people, especially those associated with the Bose family, accused us of sensationalizing the Netaji mystery and ignoring Netaji's work and personality, his activities, his achievements, his dream, his vision. So that was not at all true, because while we were working on the mystery, we were talking about Netaji. But then we realized that these things needs to be answered and answered properly. And another factor that we realized that was that although a lot of people find the mystery very attractive, I mean, it's a thriller, it's a detective story, it's a suspense story. So a lot of people get attracted to it. But then the level of awareness, level of knowledge about the man himself was pretty low. I mean, most people know about Netaji and what he did, but they had images about him, fixed images, symbols, which have been created by the government itself, by the political parties themselves, which were not accurate and certainly not all inclusive. So that bunch of symbols needed to be broken down. So, for example, within India, Netaji's only symbol was a warrior, coming on horseback, trying to liberate India, fighting with the British. That's the image. Violent, who adopted violence in contrast to Gandhiji's non-violence. And abroad, surprisingly, even today, the the primary predominant image that Netaji has is one of a Nazi collaborator, an Axis collaborator. So these are molds, these are symbols which needed to be broken down, because Subhas Chandra Bose is much, much bigger than these symbols. He was a philosopher, he was a thinker, he was one of the most erudite politicians we have ever had in our history. He had a very, very detailed and concrete vision about free India. He was much ahead of our times, of his times, and a very progressive and cultured Renaissance man. So these were the facets that needed to be brought forward with examples, with details of his work life. And the most important aspect that needed to be brought forward to establish him in the mainstream discussion of the political discourse that we have in India, from which he has been missing for the last 70 years, is that for him, nothing was above the interests of India. Nothing was above the nation. Nothing was above national interest. So he was not entrapped by political ideologies or abstract moral or ethical theories. Although, I mean, they obviously they were important, And then about a very, very important part of his persona, which was his spiritual engagement, the depth to which he went in spiritual sadhana, in his religious sadhana, that is practically unthinkable even in those days and today. So, although, I mean, in the standard political term or sociological term, we have to call him a secular, but he was a different kind of secular person. His secularism was not being afraid to announce or publicly talk about his lineage, his heritage, about the culture that he imbibed, the thousands of years of culture that he imbibed. And he constantly urged his fellow countrymen to learn from them. And at the same time, dream of an India that was united. So although we talk about the undivided India today, pining to go back to an undivided India, it was his vision that was uh, I mean which was not to be compromised. He was not ready to compromise on that. India was not to be divided. India was to remain united with multiple ethnicities, religions, cultures coming into a melting pot and creating an unique example in front of the world. So and holding on to each holding on to their own, I mean their own culture and heritage. So these are the aspects that needed to be brought forward. And no less important, this if this was one side, the other side was, why did the British decide to leave India in such haste? Obviously, I mean, freedom would have come. Nobody could have denied India her freedom. But the big question, even in 1946, was when, because the British government started telling Indians right from 1917 that someday you will get responsible government. So they said it in 1917, they said it in 1929, they said it in 1935, they said it in 1939, again in 1942, again in 1946. They kept saying this, they kept promising, but a deadline was never there. Suddenly, all of a sudden, Clement Attlee decided that the British had to leave India by June 1948. And when Mountbatten came in as the viceroy, the last viceroy, he further advanced it almost by a year. Now, he decided that the British would leave by 1947 August. So why this haste? Why this haste of dividing the country and fleeing? We have been told through years of government propaganda and brainwashing. I'm very, very deliberately using this term brainwashing, because when kids go to school, just imagine the number of generations that have gone to school since 1947, and they have been taught just one myth, that India became free because of the non-violent movement of Gandhiji. Without diminishing the role of Gandhiji, we can confidently stand up and say that this was a myth created to suit certain vested interests, and is not the historical truth. Because when we look at the documents, the declassified documents, the archival documents, the exchanges, the correspondence between the British administrators, within the British administrators, and between Indian leaders and British administrators, it becomes amply clear that behind the decision of the British Raj to leave in the haste, uh, which has been called by another historian as shameful flight, it was not the Gandhian movement. Because frankly speaking, after 1932, there had been no large-scale Gandhian movement which could frighten anybody, let alone the British Raj. So then the very question of Gandhiji's contribution, Gandhian movement's contribution towards our independence becomes infectious. So these things needed to be brought forward, told in clear language. Now, one thing which I have learned from Subhash Chandra Bose while working on him, on his disappearance, as well as his life and work for the last 16, 17 years, is that there is a very clear and marked difference in the language of politics between Subhash Bose and the Gandhians. The Gandhians talk in roundabout, convoluted ways. Circumlocution is the standard. They are both here and there so that they can shift their position very quickly depending on the situation. But Subhash Bose was very categorical in his political utterances in his writing. There is a tremendous amount of clarity with which he spoke and wrote. That clarity, that perseverance, that fixing an aim, a goal, and working towards it unwaveringly, this makes all the difference between Subhas and the Gandhians. So I have tried to follow that pattern, that example, in speaking the plain truth in plain words without going into rhetoric and jugglery of words, and bring to the leadership, to the people of a country and Indians around the world, the truth just as it is, the unvarnished, unedited truth. And in doing so, I had to make certain trade-off. I mean, in writing this book, I had to make certain trade-off because I found that certain aspects of Netaji's life had been uh, dealt with in too much detail. For example, his relation with certain Europeans who later became close to the Bose family, unnecessarily giving too much weightage to what they were talking about, what they were discussing. Well, they were important, but not so much important. There is too much importance given to minute discussions on what exactly Bhagat Ram Talwar and Uttam Chand Malhotra were telling him and what they were discussing, the emotions. So I have cut down on this and focused mainly on the parts that have not really been discussed and which needed to be discussed in much, much more detail to bring out characters who have been suppressed, who have been forgotten, who have been left out, completely out of the narrative. There were so many important characters around Subhash Bose who were helping him build up that national campaign. They have all been forgotten, left out. They needed to be brought out. What exactly Netaji was planning, that needed to be brought out because many people are not aware of the fact that although he left the country in 1941 January, he had started planning his exit from November 1939. So there was a more than 1 year of planning, and that shows what kind of personality he was. He was not impulsive. He did not rush into any kind of action. He was a meticulous planner. Would think about a course in all its detail, chalk out alternatives. So if there was a plan A, there had to be a plan B and plan C. What if plan A failed? He had to have alternatives. So these are kind of personality traits that make him stand apart from the pantheon of leaders. And of course, there were the questions of his relation with the Gandhian leadership, which needed to be told in plain words, without masking, without trying to be nice, and without trying to paper up the unpleasant sides of that of those relations. So that's what I have tried to achieve through this book. I hope when you read it, you will like it. And I look forward, genuinely, I look forward to your feedback. And this now stands as the entire body of our work, which Anuj and I have done on the disappearance part, and now which I have written about his life and work. So this is a complete whole. We cannot do with one without the other. And this, I hope, will push our campaign forward and give the campaign more momentum, the momentum that it needs. And with the help and support that we find from you today, that's very touching and very, very pleasing to the heart. And I look forward to this continued support and look forward to your feedback. And I'll just stop here and thank all of you, Australian Hindu Media, Amindraji, Bhartiji, Partha, thank you for those kind words. Very nice words indeed, and very encouraging. And to all those who are present today, thank you very much.
Thank you, Chandrachudji, for your insights into the work, the research, and the struggles that you have been facing till date. I would now invite and hand over the floor to Mr. Anuj Dhar so that he can also share his side of the story with us.
Well, thank you very much. I was not scheduled to speak, but since you have been so kind enough to add me, and I'm very thankful to you for organizing this session. And this is for the first time I'm directly speaking to somebody in Australia. There have been points in time there were discussions of getting me to your country, but somehow never became feasible. So I look forward to in future. We are planning. It's quite possible because COVID has uh, uh, confined to our homes for last 2 years. So this is a very important year, and this year we cannot sit at homes in our homes. So we need to go out and do our lectures and all that. So last 2 years were very bad for all of us. We were not able to go out and discuss, take the issue to the public, because in the last 2 or 3 years, we have made a lot of breakthroughs. One of the breaks, of course, Chandra Choor's books, and now we can also talk about Netaji's life and time. But in terms of the death issue, where I am, I'm focused still, we have made a lot of breakthroughs, but unfortunately, we could not, share these, new findings with people because we were again sitting in our homes. And so I for one, I'm not very, I somehow, the emotions don't come out when I see people on screen. So I would rather see people face to face and then give my comments and so on and so forth. So this is a very important year for all of us because this is the 125th year of Netaji's birth anniversary. This also happens to be the 75th year of India's independence. So the convergence of these two important dates in our history is very important. Anyway, in case you have been visiting India, there's a lot of talk of Netaji here, and also in the context of the entire freedom struggle, Subhash is being discussed. So now for us, people like us who have been struggling for the last 20 years about Netaji, what he did for us, and also those such as you who have been supporting of what we have been doing, it's a very important, very, very crucial year. So we need to get our acts together and try and achieve our aims. The success of this movie, Kashmir Files, has shown us the way forward. Times have changed. We are not living in India of, forget 1990s, even to early 2000s. Things have changed, and people, thanks to the social media and many other factors, now you can get your words across. It's no longer what things used to be as they were before 1990s. So we need to make the best of this change in circumstance and take our case forward. So I'm very hopeful in the times to come we will be able to achieve our aim. Luckily for us, the government is not hostile. I would say that, even though I'm not very pleased with them when it comes to Subhash Chandra Bose, they have done at least one wonderful thing, which is the announcement made by my Prime Minister about the installation of Netaji statue at the very heart of New Delhi, and that's very, very, very encouraging. That's probably the best tribute to Netaji's legacy since independence. But then we need to move forward. We need to achieve many more things. So all the same, even though we're not very, very happy, but then one thing we must understand and appreciate, that this is not a government which is hostile. If we cannot get our get our demands met by the government now, we probably would not be able to in times to come. So that's where people such as you come in the picture. So your support. Thankful and grateful to you that you could organize a session such as this one, where we can take our case before audience, which is maybe 13,000 kilometers away from my country. And I'm so delighted to be here, and thank you very much for inviting Chandra Choor and me. And I look forward to more sessions, not just this one. And probably in future, I look forward to being there in person, as I've been to America several times. So we can share our new findings, and there's so much that we have uncovered. And I must add, thinking of Australia, that even your country has been very helpful. I recall sometimes in 2002 or 3, I wrote to your government, your foreign minister, Mr. Donner used to be the foreign minister still in those days. I was wanting to make some queries about certain allegations against Subhash Chandra Bose in the past about his being a war criminal. Very grateful that my letter was forwarded to the civil servant in charge of India section of the Australian Foreign Ministry. And he was good enough to send me a letter, which I have with me. And then I took up the issue with the Australian National Archives. And they were so good enough. In fact, I wrote this thing in my book, my book in this big scope. They were so kind enough to photocopy 2 files about Netaji and send them across to me. I keep giving people example. Look, we in our country, we are cagey about sharing information. And this is one good example, of coming from Australia, that I just wrote an email, and people were good enough to respond at the highest level. And not only that, they were good enough and kind enough to photocopy a file, 2 files of concerning Subhash Chandra Bose, and send me just the printed copies of them to India. So this is a sort of thing. So I have a very because of this particular incident, I have a very favorable review of Australia. I have my own good friends there, and one of my cousins is also there. I have, of course, now two of my cousin children are born in your country, so obviously I have, in a sense, a part of me is there. So I look forward to more such sessions. So this is just an online thing. So probably in future we will be able to see each other face to face and then take the whole thing momentum forward. Thank you very much, and so kind of you.
Thank you, Anuj, and definitely we look forward for your physical visit as well. I think the restrictions have been easing, and hopefully the things will be easier in this year as well regarding to the travel restrictions and all. So I think we have questions from the audience now, and our first question is from Mr. Anindya Ghosh.
Thanks, Bharti. Chandrachur, good to see you. See you both, you and Anuj, although virtually. My question is, why are you characterizing Netaji as an inconvenient nationalist? Why inconvenient?
Inconvenient because, as I said, that for Subhash Chandra Bose, it was the nation first. And that's the slogan that he gave in 1939, which came back. That proves how far-sighted he was, which came back as a slogan, electoral slogan in 2013-14, which Prime Minister Modi, before he became Prime Minister, in his campaign, he used that slogan, India first. But it came from Subhash Bose in 1939, where in his categorical words, he said, India should think of herself first, not about what is going on in the world, what is happening inside other countries, are their business. It's not our business to preach their morality or ethics. Let them handle their problem. For us, the biggest thing is the first priority is to become free. Anyway, coming back to the question, why inconvenient? Now, Subhash Chandra Bose was a man who was not bound by any political ideology or dogma or doctrine. So he found useful stuff in practically all the ideologies. So he found useful stuff in communism, in fascism, in the history and culture of India. He imbibed several values, but his prime argument was that it has to be rooted in Indian practice, Indian thought, Indian culture. It cannot be imported and imposed in India. Now, when this was his position, he was obviously he did not belong to the Communist Party because he was not a doctrinaire. The Communist Party kind of allied with him at several points of time when they found him useful, and threw him away when they found that he was actually encroaching in their constituents. They were very afraid. The Communist Party and the leftist parties, other leftists, were very cagey about him. That Subhash is, as a person, as an individual, is stepping onto their territory and taking away their constituency. So that was one aspect. About Hindu Mahasabha, Subhash allied with the Hindu Mahasabha, and he had good things to talk about Hindu Mahasabha, but the conflict with Hindu Mahasabha started when Shyama Prasad Mukherjee and Veer Savarkar entered the electoral political arena. So that is when he had a clash of thoughts with them. But even then, he tried an alliance during the Calcutta corporation elections of 1940. Didn't work out, and he blamed the reactionary forces in the Hindu Mahasabha, not the Hindu minded, not the Hindu Mahasabha as a whole. But he said there are regressive elements within the Hindu Mahasabha who didn't let this alliance work. He tried an alliance with the Muslim League, but that also he was very, very aware of the pitfalls. He was essentially trying to build a broad platform, a coalition, without belonging to any political party. Now, many people have problems with his allying with the Muslim League of those days, particularly when they had already started talking about the Pakistan line. But they forget two things. First is that the Pakistan demand was not yet concretely defined. It was just a thought in the form of separate autonomous areas where Muslims were larger in population share. So he was trying to bring out the progressive. I mean, he said it publicly that he was trying to bring out the progressive elements within the Muslim League, and that also didn't work out because obviously their communal politics, it didn't work out. But nobody understood India's politics better than the British governors. I mean, the Bengal governor saw through the thing. He wrote this. I have written in Conundrum, where he wrote a letter to the viceroy at that time that the Muslim League is overjoyed in having Subhas in their fold, in alliance with them. But they have no idea what this man can do. He's such a slippery personality. He will achieve his goal, his aim, and leave the Muslim League high and dry. So their joy and their thinking that they have got Subhas within their grasp is premature and completely unreal, unpractical. So these were the relations with the Muslim League, Hindu Mahasabha, Communist Party, and with the Gandhian Congress. The relations are very well known. It does not need me to dwell on that at detail, at length. Even with the Congress Socialist Party, although Jayaprakash Narayan, Ram Manohar Lohia, they were admirers of Subhas. They stood away from him. They went away from him, fearing that Subhas was bringing in a split within the Congress, and they were not happy with it. But later on, Jayaprakash Narayan in 1940, towards the end of 1940, he realized his mistake and sent a secret letter to Subhas Bose saying that your reading was correct and my reading was wrong. So let's get together and do something together. But it was too late. Subhas had already made up his mind. The ball had been set rolling for his going out of India. So Jayaprakash did not forget. So when Netaji was speaking from Germany, from Southeast Asia, the Congress Socialist Party actually was supporting him. And that was another factor that angered the Communist Party. So although we see with his immense popularity, with his ground base, although he did not have a very well-defined constituency like Baba Saheb Ambedkar had, or Gandhiji had, or Pandit Nehru had, his popularity was cutting across the lines, the layers of political ideology, of caste, of religion. Think of all the barriers, and his popularity was spread across, unlike many of the contemporary political leaders. So although all these parties had to give him his due, his importance because of his extreme popularity, but none of them could appropriate him. As a result, I mean, they had their own grievances against him. As a result, when India became free, the Gandhian Congress, which ruled the country for the first 60 years, they never let Subhas Bose come into the mainstream. They had their problems because they knew if Subhas was made mainstream, if Subhas came back into the political discourse, mainstream political discourse, then that would sound the death knell of Nehruvianism and Gandhiism. So they could not let that happen. They kept Subhas at the fridge. The leftists, they pay compliments to Subhas in many ways, that he was a great man, great revolutionary, but they always end it with a but. But he allied with the Axis powers. So he misread the situation. He was not a true revolutionary, and all those kind of things then come back. So today there is a lot of complaint from this left Congress ecosystem, complaining that the NDA, the BJP, is trying to appropriate Subhas by erecting his statue, by observing the 75th anniversary of the formation of the Azad Hind government. But in truth, the fact is that all governments, all political parties have tried to appropriate him without giving him the due recognition, the recognition that he deserved. So there is always a thorn. Every party has a thorn with him somewhere. They acknowledge his popularity. They acknowledge his contribution willy-nilly, sometimes most of the times reluctantly. So, but they won't go the full mile. They won't go the full length and stop somewhere between two so that he can be kept on the sidelines, never to be brought into the mainstream. So in today's India, in the last 70 years political discourse, we have had Gandhi, we have had Nehru, we have had Ambedkar, we have had Kashnara, we have had Lohia, and many others smaller figures who form the mainstream political discourse. But we have never seen Subhash Bose being a part of the discourse, his ideas, his vision being a part of the discourse. And that is because he has remained inconvenient to each of the political formations and groupings. And that is one thing that we constantly need to remember, that nobody, although I mean everybody praised him, but nobody owned him. And everybody later on tried to appropriate him. It is so that accusation against the NDA, the BJP, is unfair. It is equally applicable to Congress. It is equally applicable to the left front and as much as the BJP. So for all parties, now the BJP is trying to portray him, but it is also trying to portray Sardar Patel as its icon. Now, we know the relation that Sardar Patel had with Subhash Bose and the huge difference, because Sardar Patel was Mahatma Gandhi's right-hand man, and he was the executioner of Mahatma Gandhi's ideas. So you cannot have both of them in the same parenthesis. So that's what makes him very inconvenient to all the political formations. That's why I have used that phrase right as the title of the book. He is an inconvenient nationalist. Nobody can doubt question his nationalist credentials, but he remained inconvenient to everybody because he placed nationalism, nation above everything. And for the others, in contrast, either the party or the ideology came first. I hope I have answered your question properly, Ananda.
Thank you, Chandrachurji. Can we move to our next question from Sandeep?
Namaste, Chandrachurji. As you were speaking about Congress Party, Lohia ji and Gandhi ji, so I would like to ask you, so how would you describe Netaji's relationship with Mahatma Gandhi and Jawaharlal Nehru? Because they were all together in Congress Party that time.
Yeah, in fact, there were good parts and bad parts. There were easy aspects, there were difficult aspects. Nothing is homogeneous. No relationship is homogeneous or uniform. So Subhash Bose acknowledged, accepted the role that Gandhiji played in awakening the Indian people, the mass of Indian people, to give them the political sense, the political awakening, and bring them into political action. Because before that, politics in India was restricted to the elite section of the society. They would gather annually or half-yearly, discuss issues, think about how to get more powers in their hand, either through the legislative assemblies or by petitioning to the government. And that was the pattern that was going on. Now, Gandhiji came and changed that. He brought in the common man into the equation. And Subhash Bose actually thought that was a revolutionary act. that showed the revolutionary mettle of Gandhiji. But having said that, he also believed that after 1932, the civil disobedience movement, Gandhiji actually was a spent force. And he had done his bit in the Indian freedom struggle and had become more of an obstacle than a proper guide or a moving force. Now, this was the primary mentality attitude that he had towards Gandhiji. This did not diminish his respect. So many people tend to mix it up, get confused when I say. In fact, I posted something yesterday on both Facebook and Twitter, where in 1940 he is writing to his elder brother Sarat Chandra Bose from jail. He says that the more I think of Congress politics, the more convinced I feel that in future we should devote more energy and time to fighting the High Command. If power goes into the hands of such mean, vindictive, and unscrupulous persons when Swaraj is won, what will happen to the country? So this is what he was thinking in 1940. Now, with Pandit Nehru, he had a very good relationship till the late 1930s because both were modern in outlook, very different from Gandhiji. They had similar economic thoughts, and social values were more or less similar, although Subhash was more grounded in Indian values and Indian legacy. He believed that India as a country has a mission, and this idea of India having a mission was an anathema to both Pandit Nehru and also to people like Bhagat Singh, because they never understood. They used to criticize Subhash Bose for saying that, I mean, India is just another country. It's another piece of land where people live, and it has grown up as a country. So no country has any special place in this world, or no country has any special mission in this world, or a special message for the world. It's just like any other country. So that there was a very big difference there, because Subhash believed that given India's antiquity, its ancient civilizational values, and its achievements, India had a message to the world, and had to set an example in front of the world. So there was a big dichotomy there. But that was philosophical. In terms of interpersonal relationship, that started getting spoiled with Pandit Nehru from around 1939, when he was reelected, when Subhash Bose was re-elected as the Rashtrapati. That is when Nehru tried at first to remain neutral, but he could not remain neutral for long, and he joined the Gandhian bandwagon. And that is one aspect, that is one trait of Panditji's character, which Subhash was very vocally critical about. He always complained, he always pointed to two aspects, characteristic traits, one of Gandhiji and another of Panditji. But Panditji used to say that, and we see it in Panditji's own writing. If you read his autobiography, it is supported by his own writing. He said, Subhash used to say that at every progressive stake, at every radical decision which the younger generation of the Congress were taking, Pandit Nehru would agree and start with everybody else. But when it came to a conflict with Gandhism, he would drop everything else and go back to the Gandhian camp. He could never break away from Gandhi's ideas or influence. So he would desert the revolutionary or the progressive elements, the radical elements in Congress, and go back to Gandhi's fold. And for Gandhiji, Subhash had this criticism that in his campaign, which was actually a criticism formulated by Deshbandhu Chittaranjan Das, Subhash's political mentor, that Gandhiji started political campaigns in a brilliant fashion. And he moved from strength to strength until the movement reached to the peak. And then something used to happen where Gandhiji used to lose his nerve and used to come down looking for compromises. So Subhash Bose was always very, very edgy about Gandhiji and Pandit Nehru, looking for avenues to compromise, to find a compromise with the British Raj. And that was exactly what was going to happen in 1939-40, again in the Cripps, during the Cripps mission in 1942, and in what we saw, what actually happened in 1946 when the cabinet mission came in, and after that when Mountbatten came in, there were compromises made. Principles were forgotten. The same Pandit Nehru, who had been, so strongly derisive of the idea of remaining in the Commonwealth and India becoming a dominion country, agreed to both. And he was one of the first ones to agree to that. So he left his principles, he forgot his principles. But Subhash was somebody who would never compromise on his principles, because for him, these are the two very demonstrative quotes. One is from Gandhiji, who used to say that I am a man of compromise. Compromise is not bad. I am a man of compromise. And for Subhash, his quote, and these are actually found from the speeches and writings, several areas, that compromise is a sin. So you should never compromise on your principles and ideals. So this was the point of conflict. And obviously, there were other areas of conflict with the Gandhian worldview. So Subhash was scientific, progressive. He would talk about heavy industrialization. He would talk about women's emancipation. He would talk about science having a large role in the in bringing up the future generations. So all these were not good things in the years of Gandhiji. And obviously, he hit back in many ways, in as many ways as he could. And even on the partition of the country, although Gandhiji first opposed it, he then gave in. Obviously, Panditji, Sardar Patel, all of them gave in. they were not ready to prolong the struggle anymore. As Pandit Nehru was famously quoted by one of the historians, journalist historians, who's when he said in an interview that we had become old men and we were tired old men, and we just wanted uh, to find an easy life at the end of it, and we were impatient for that easy life. So they agreed to everything that they had stood against and made a compromise. Subhas, had he been back to India, wouldn't have let it happen. So that defines, in a nutshell, the relationship between the two groups, between Subhas and the Gandhian.
Thank you. We have our next question coming from Sachin Gaur.
Namaste Chanjut ji, namaste Anuj Dhar ji. Thanks Bharti. My question is we have grown up hearing and learning these lines, "De di hame azadi bina khadak bina dhal." My question is related to this only. Who really got India independence? Gandhi or Bose, Ahimsa or INA? Thank you.
Thank you. To answer briefly, there is always a difference between fact and propaganda. What we have learned is official propaganda. It's a mythology which has been constructed by the government of India from the time of independence or transfer of power. And that mythology was kicked off by no less than Pandit Nehru himself. Speaking from the Red Fort for the first time after India became free on 16th August 1947, he laid foundation of this mythology when he said that India has won our freedom under the guidance of Mahatma Gandhi and through the nonviolent Satyagraha movement. So, but as I said a few minutes ago, that show me one Satyagraha movement, mass Satyagraha after 1932. So, if truly we had won independence through Satyagraha and mass nonviolent movement, why did it take 15 years from 1932 to 1947? Because the last time Gandhiji gave a call for any movement was the Quit India movement. And within a few hours of giving that call, all the Congress leaders were arrested and the Quit India movement became an autonomous movement. And after it became autonomous, it acquired two characteristics. First, it became violent. And second, it went underground. Now, both these characteristics are as un-Gandhian as a movement can be. So, Quit India movement, the few months from August to November, till the time it was completely suppressed. By November, it was completely suppressed. Whatever we saw during that phase, this August, September, October, November, 3 months to 4 months, was un-Gandhian, completely un-Gandhian movement. So there was no question of civil disobedience or non-violent satyagraha. Now coming to the question, so then why did the British leave? I have covered this question in great detail. I've devoted a separate chapter as to why the British left in this book. And there I have quoted from classified documents, declassified documents, from the documents related to the transfer of power and other several memos of the British army commanders and commander-in-chief in India, the viceroy in India, and the British prime minister. What made them leave in such a haste? When the INA soldiers, so let me start a bit earlier. When the World War ended, that is when the British government decided that the Congress leaders can be released. So from 1942 August till 1945 June, they were in prison. The top leaders were in much comfortable prisons, almost 3-star, 4-star prisons. And here I will just digress for 1 second that apart from Subhash, you will not find a single top Congress leader ever exiled from India. They did not need to be exiled. Subhash was the only person who was exiled twice, from 1924 to 1927, and again from 1933 to 1936. So that itself tells you a story. Now, when these leaders were released in 45 June and they came out, they saw that the freedom movement was all but over. The movement had died down. There was no issue. The organization was helter-skelter, going helter-skelter. There was no sign of any Congress organization. It had to be reorganized, rebuilt, and there was no agenda. So to do that, to rebuild Congress, Gandhiji told all the top leaders to go back to their places, respective regions, and get back into constructive activity. What is this constructive program? This constructive program was Khadi, Charkha, prohibition related to prohibition on alcohol, removal of untouchability, and doing rural work. So he told the leaders, do this for the time being because there is nothing that we can do right now. So at this time, we find Sardar Patel moving this resolution in the Congress AICC session in September 1945, that the British had promised us that they would hand over power after the war was over, but they are not showing any signs of transferring power. So this was the position. Now, as this was developing, suddenly, as it happened, the INA soldiers were being brought back in batches. And the British government announced that they were to be put onto trial. Now, the Indians, even the Congress leaders, had no inkling about Subhas Bose's activity in Germany and in East Asia. And they had absolutely no clue about the INA because there was a complete blackout. Indian press was not to take the name of Subhas Bose. Indian press was not to take the name of the INA. So the first time it started talking about the INA, very existence of the INA, and that Subhas Bose was in East Asia, was sometime towards the end of May 1945. That is when it started, after the Axis powers in Europe had collapsed and Japan was on the verge of surrender. They had lost the war clearly. It was just switching on. And that is when the government of India decided that the blanket ban on Subhas and the INA would be lifted and mentions could be made, news could be published. That is when India came to know about INA. Now the reaction, as soon as the news started trickling in and the soldiers started coming back, the reaction was so volcanic. It was, the magnitude of the reaction was so huge that it got everybody startled. Nobody had expected this, least of all the British government. They were at a loss. I mean, they went on with the Red Fort trials, and that was a blunder, which they later realized and admitted. But here, Congress party saw the opportunity. But they sent their men around the country to figure out the pulse of the people and realize that this is a very, very explosive issue which has touched the heart of the people of the country, even in interior rural areas. And they decided to take it up. So suddenly, the non-violent Congress became votaries of the INA. They set up a committee to defend the INA in the Red Fort, where even Panditji put on the black coat of a lawyer and posed for photo ops there. Although, I mean, it is doubtful how many days he attended the trial and whether he's ever spoke any word at all. Nobody knows. I mean, as far as I know, he didn't speak a word there during the trial, and it was entirely Bhulabhai Desai's argument, because that was a masterpiece in the defense of the INA. So the Congress did its utmost to utilize, to exploit the INA issue. And whatever reaction was there, autonomous sui generis reaction was there, Congress took it with its organization a notch higher. And as a result, the British found that the British Indian Army, the Indian soldiers in the British Indian Army, many of whom were being decommissioned and sent back to their homes, they were coming under the influence of the INA soldiers. And even those who had remained within the British Indian Army at that time, they started sympathizing with the INA. So it was a completely opposite attitude of the British government. And it reached a stage very soon. By early 1946, the British government were exchanging letters. The Viceroy, the Prime Minister, the Commander-in-Chief, they were exchanging secret correspondence that if this continues, there is bound to be a mass movement. And if the mass movement takes place, then the Indian soldiers in the British Indian Army are more likely to side with the INA and with the Indian people, and the British would be thrown out. And it was at this time, it was very interesting and amusing do, that a group of British parliamentarians went and met Clement Attlee in London and gave him two options. He said that as a country, as a nation, we have two options in front of us as far as India is concerned. Option A is leave that country and just come out. The option is wait and then be kicked out. So you choose as a prime minister which is your option. And it was very clear to the entire the authorities, the government, at all levels of government, that they had lost the sympathy of the strongest pillar of their governance in India. That was the armed forces. They had held India by the strength, by the force of the armed forces. And if this was not bad enough, there was the revolt in the rebellion in the Royal Indian Air Force, immediately followed by the rebellion in the Royal Indian Navy. And that made it absolutely clear that the armed forces were lost. They could not be trusted. And this is when we find Field Marshal Auchinleck, the Commander-in-Chief of the Indian Forces, desperately pleading with his home government that send me reinforcements. I need reinforcements, and those reinforcements must be purely British soldiers. I don't want any Indians in those reinforcements. All the contingents must be purely British. Escape plans were devised, secret escape plans. Escape plans means not for a period of 3 months to 6 months or anything like that. Escape plans to be executed within a moment's notice. So if there is an uprising, what would the British authorities do, administrators do? How would they escape? How would they all come to one place, put on a ship, and then how they would sail, or how they would take a train and go to Northwest Frontier Province, or how they would take a flight? All these escape plans were prepared. So by mid-1946, they were ready to leave. But obviously there were geopolitical equations. There were other interests to be taken care of. So the negotiations went on. And the reason for this dragging of this situation primarily lied with the Congress. Because when the Royal Indian Air Force and the Royal Indian Navy rebelled, it was the Congress leaders who told them that don't do all these things now. We are on the verge of winning independence. Let's sit and talk. Let's do it peacefully. So there is no need to go against the British now. They're ready to hand over power. So they became the surrogate. They knew that they were the new brown Sahibs. They were to replace the British government, and they could not let the rebellion take place, let the British be thrown out in that manner. So once the Britishers realized that, they also realized that they could push their own interests through these Congress leaders. And that is how it dragged from mid-1946 till the end of 1940, till August 1947, and how the compromises were made. India was divided and left in a dire situation. But coming back to your original question, it was because of Netaji Subhas Chandra Bose and the INA and their impact on the Indian people, which made the British Raj exit in haste.
Thank you, Chandrachud. I think that was one very important aspect of our history that we want to get right. I think there's a very interesting question coming from the audience, and it's from Sushant Sohani. So can we have Sushant? Sushant, do you want to ask your question?
Sushant, you can unmute yourself, please.
Yeah, can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. Yeah, so want to ask a couple of questions which probably never been discussed in any of your show. Okay,
Sushant, one question, please. Sorry, one question for the time being. Thank you.
I think we need to unmute him again.
Can you hear me?
Yes, Sushant, can you please repeat your question?
Yeah, so my question is about Goa liberation. Okay, so Goa was Indian Portuguese territory until 1960s. Okay, so they ruled Goa and Diu Daman for almost 450 years. So during British time as well. So I assume that British could anyway, win that territory from Portuguese, but they had certain kind of agreement between them. That's what my assumption is. So what happened that considering that India was still a dominion of Britain in 1960s, they allowed India to invade or whatever, take control of Goa and Diu Daman. When they did not allow India to do that in POK. Okay.
No, Sushant. Firstly, India was not a dominion in 1960. India became a republic in 1950. So it was not a dominion anymore after that. And secondly, India's recapture of Goa was not taken kindly by the Western democracies. They were extremely critical. There was a large hue and cry for taking back Goa. And none of the powers were happy at that time. Neither Britain nor America were happy with it. But there is a bigger question than that, which perhaps has evaded your notice, is where I would ask that why did Nehru, why did a Gandhian prime minister have to send in the army? He could have sent, why did he lose faith in Gandhian Satyagraha? Why was non-violent not effective anymore? Why couldn't he make the Portuguese leave through non-violent public action, mass action? They could have just thrown the Portuguese, they could have made the Portuguese leave Goa by their moral force, which is the unique characteristic of Satyagraha. So that puts a big question mark on the adherence to Gandhism by the Gandhian establishment, and further proves my point that what we have learned about Gandhism, what the narrative about Gandhism is nothing but a mythology constructed to serve the interests of particular segments in the power.
Thanks, Chandrachur. So being one of the hosts, let me take the liberty of asking you one question from my end too.
Sure.
Chandrachurji, welcome, and Anujji, welcome. Good to have a KP brother along with in the session. Chandrachurji, while most of the Indians, majority of Indians hail Netaji as their mass leader, but there's a very small percentage which treat him as a negative, in a negative light because he talked to Hitler as an example. What's your view on that?
Yeah, do you remember how Saddam Hussein was hounded and killed in a hole?
Yes.
And does it bring to your mind a very nice, prominent photograph of Prime Minister Indira Gandhi shaking hands with Saddam Hussein?
Yes.
Does that make Indira Gandhi a villain?
You answered it.
The thing, again, I said is that national interest above everything else. What Subhas Bose was again and again, he was reiterating is that what is happening inside other countries is none of our business. We have only one business right now, and that is to get our freedom. But having said that, Subhas Bose was a very, very vocal critic of the racist policies of Germany. And that was not only in 1941-42 when he spent time there. It began from 1933 when he went to Europe on exile. So while on the one hand he was talking to the National Socialist leaders in Germany, he was also representing the interests of the Indian students who had been victimized because of the racist policies. He was writing petitions and letters in very, very strong terms, and he called the German government narrow, sectarian, and bigoted. These are very strong words for a national leader to use for another government. So where he felt that it was time to condemn their policies and condemn their work, he did that. But when it came to India's national interest, and he felt that Germany, Italy were the only powers who were ready to help India against the British, he wasn't hesitant to take help from them. But even there, did he suppress his moral values? No. Because we find that when Germany invaded Russia, Subhas wrote a very, very critical letter to Ribbentrop. And later when he met Ribbentrop, he was equally vocal. So he was not a person who was afraid to speak the truth to the power. And he was asking for help, for favors, on his own terms. But what was his stature? His stature for the Germans, for the Italians, what was his value? He didn't have as much value as Gandhi had in terms of propaganda. But even then, the Germans and the Italians went all out to give him all help that he sought, that he asked. He just had to ask, and they were giving him everything that he asked for. So this was not done for any other leader. So there was something about him which was again evident in case of Prime Minister Tojo in Japan, where when Subhash Bose reached Tokyo, Prime Minister Tojo was not even ready to meet him. So the Subhas had by that time met the foreign minister and the army commanders, naval commanders, and they lobbied with Tojo, and Tojo gave him 10 minutes. Subhas went to meet him, and meeting stretched for more than 1.5 hours. And so impressed was Tojo with his plan and his vision. In that brief meeting, he promised unadulterated and any unconditional help without any drawback, without any pullback, unconditional. He promised it in the very first meeting, and again met with his entire cabinet and the armed forces commanders just one day later with Subhash. So Subhash, and Subhash, I will remind you that he had been very critical of Japanese atrocities in China. And he wrote a very long article in the Modern Review, the most well-known English magazine in India of these times, criticizing Japan and hoping that they would reconcile and come together and these kind of barbarities would be taken away. So he was critical, he was criticizing, he was not suppressing his moral values. But at the same time, his moral values were at one place and India's national interests were at another place, and national interest was above everything else.
Thank you. Can we take a next question from Vibhor? Vibhor, do you want to ask your question?
Yep. Thank you, Bharti.
I think Anuj is raising his hand. Anuj, do you want to add anything before we move on to the next question?
No, I just want to make one small, like Chandrachud was just saying, forget Saddam Hussein. Right now, we're having this war in Ukraine, and Western powers have declared Mr. Putin to be a war criminal, and India has not many, students in Ukraine, and we are all, seeing what's happened to them, and we are feeling very, depressed about what's happening. But at the same time, India remains in the Russian camp, because don't forget, Russia is our most dependable ally for last many decades now. So forget about, so what's happening right now, probably similar thing happened during Second World War. Seen from the Western prism, Hitler was, of course, a monster. But unfortunately, from the Indian eyes, if I were to look at things in those days, Churchill was the monster. So every country has to pursue its own national interest and national security. And in India, we see a lot of hypocrisy when people talk about Subhash Chandra Bose. So they forget about even Pakistan. People of this country are so worried about what happened in Europe, 7,000-8,000 miles away from India. But what's happening in our backyard, we are not concerned. So we are okay with even Pakistani presidents and people responsible for our killings in our country coming to New Delhi. We would host them, we would take photographs, take them to Taj Mahal, whatnot. Very strange, and then the problem, the question which Sachin was asking, about the Gandhian myth. The problem in the Gandhian myth in today's time it has become a big obstacle for us people who are wanting to pursue the issue of Subhash Chandra Bose's fate and his contribution to make India free. Now, this Gandhian myth has become the biggest obstacle for us, and because the entire Indian elite class, the sahibs of North Block and South Block in Delhi, usually they are the people who see the world from the Western eyes, and at least in the context of Second World War. And the Gandhian myth has become so much popular, especially in the Western countries, and these people are not willing to see beyond, because this. And then the problem with the Netaji issue today is if you somehow try to bring out the truth about his life, his fate, eventually this whole issue will come, will boil down to the basic fact of history that India became free because of Subhash Chandra Bose. Now, adding to what Chandrachud has said, if you pick up because a lot of data which has become available now, which was not available earlier, many documents have been declassified. Even though the British destroyed not many records in India, but still many are still, which have survived. Between 1945, late 45, probably mid 45 to mid 46, when the decision was taken to free India by the British. If you see the correspondence, between London and England, London and New Delhi, whether it was the viceroy here or the commander in chief or the prime minister there, and even if you factor in the statements given by the British prime minister of the day inside Parliament and outside, and whatever he wrote in his book subsequently, nowhere we sign even remotely you will detect any sign that the British took the decision to free India because there was some kind of ahimsa was going on in this country. So ahimsa is not a factor at all. Go through the records, which is not a factor at all. But this myth has become so big that today, if you bring out the truth about Netaji, this myth would be demolished. And the problem with this myth, it is like Coca-Cola brand of India. It's sells, especially in the Western countries, started in England. And that's why the even elite class are not willing to let go of it, because there's so much to gain from it. Let's take even our own Prime Minister Modi. I'm not remembering whether it was in Australia or in Germany. He made the statements publicly, and I couldn't believe, what he was saying. That, you can follow the Gandhiji's path and even defeat terrorism. If we can defeat terrorism by following Mahatma Gandhi's path, then what is the need for Ajit Doval to go to Kashmir? Might as well send, Diggi Raja to Kashmir, and then he can also go to Ukraine. And for all we know, we might get a Nobel Peace Prize, this year, which we haven't gotten, unfortunately. So these kind of, nonsense is being talked about at the highest level, and it's very shameful for us, that we. So anyhow, but this Gandhian myth has become a big obstacle for us, and it would be, as and when the truth about Netaji comes out, the Gandhian myth will be the casualty, and that's why the people who want.
In fact, we had a very small prayer to the Prime Minister. We had urged the Prime Minister to take one small step which would resolve the conflict with the Chinese, and we asked the Gandhi Peace Foundation headquarters to be shifted to Galwan. So we were pretty sure that could have resolved all conflicts, but unfortunately nobody listens to us.
More so because our foreign secretaries and all our dignitaries in the country have been stressing on this point, and again that we don't need to do all this with the Gandhian path. Everything is possible. Gandhiji himself said, ahimsa has so much of power that even atom bombs are not used, can impact you. And he claimed that the British commanders were in agreement with him. I do not know which commander was referring to. So time has come to demonstrate, because when my own Prime Minister, my President and Vice President, and so others, especially when they go abroad, when they keep talking about these things, that these principles are still valid, they have relevance, please show me how they're relevant, because I want to see. You didn't show me in Goa, you didn't show me in Kashmir, you didn't show me anywhere. So where are they relevant? How? So that's one dilemma, and that's our problem, that this Gandhian myth is going to be the biggest casualty of the truth as and when it comes out.
Thanks, Anuj bhai. We have Bharti, we have two more questions, Vibhor ji and
Aparna.
Aparna ji, yes.
Vibhor, can you ask your question?
Yeah, thank you, Bharti ji. First of all, namaste, Chandrachud ji and Anuj ji for joining this event, and a big congratulations for your new book. I have a small question from you. Can you talk more about Netaji's thoughts on Hinduism? Thank you.
Netaji's thoughts of Hinduism are actually vast and spreads across to an extent which is not matched by any other contemporary political leader. Not even leaders who were representing the Hindu community in politics. Firstly, his religion, his spirituality was not theoretical, which primarily was Gandhiji's thing. I mean, he used to talk in a lot of theory and interpretations and all. Netaji had a more hands-on approach. Early from his childhood, he went into sadhana. So he would want to experience rather than talk and discuss and interpret. So right from his teenage, we find him searching for a guru, running from here to there in search of a guru. And at the age of 17, he ran away from home in search of a guru, which is a very well-known incident. Most of you would know about it. And this quest, this inner quest of evolving spiritual awareness, awakening, give it any name you want, we find take a different magnitude in the Burmese prisons when he was sent to Mandalay in 1924. There we find him. Fortunately, we have his. His letters exist, and there we find listing of the books that he was reading. He was calling for those books. So all the scriptures, the tantra text, he was reading in original. He was trying out the sadhana. He would meditate, and the standing feature of Subhash Bose, whenever he was in prison, is that one corner of his cell would be curtained off, would be covered by a curtain. That was his puja and sadhana space. Nobody was allowed there. And throughout all his prison terms, we have got eyewitness accounts which tell us of his rigorous sadhana. And some of them actually saw him coming out of his puja room in the middle of the night with his eyes completely red and flushed red cheeks and walking as if intoxicated. We find his regularly going to the Ramakrishna mission in Singapore, even when the war is at the full fledged, at its peak. Places were being bombed, the INA forces are in the front. He would not stop doing his meditation and his puja and his spirituality. That was his practical side, his practical spirituality, practical sadhana. Something that Vivekananda probably gave him that value. He learned that value from Vivekananda. Rather than theory of the other leaders, he was more into practice. And this was visible to practically every world leader of his time. And even people who were generally educated and urban and progressive, they would notice this. And the deeper sides of it are available from his childhood friend Dilip Kumar Roy's memoirs, who tell us about how he was being conflicted within himself about the religious imageries, of whether to follow Shakta sadhana or Vaishnava sadhana, whether it was Shiv or Shakti or Vishnu, who was his Ishta Devata. So these were very real things. He was not interpreting Gita like Gandhiji did as a parable, as a fable, that it's a conflict between good and evil within your mind. It was not his thing to do. And even while in Mandalay, he wrote something very bold, which I haven't found in other people's writings, in other leaders' writings. He was writing his diary. He used to jot his thoughts in a diary regularly, and he named that diary "Pebbles on the Seashore." So there, in one entry, we find he is arguing in favor of transforming Hinduism into a proselytizing religion, which would go out into the world and convert people into Hinduism just the way other religions do. He said that there is no reason why we should just stop accepting new people into our fold, and why you only have to be born a Hindu. Because, he gave many arguments. I'm not going into that. But that was a very, very bold and striking thought for someone of his age. He was just about 27 years old. And in those times, because even for radical leaders, religious leaders, we were hearing back to the Vedas and Shuddhi, bringing back in people who had left Hinduism. But here was a much bigger aspect. He was talking in a much bigger scale while going out. He started with Africa as the first ideal place to start with, that we should go out, get people converted to Hinduism. We should make them more spiritually civilized. So for him, and many people ask about his Hinduism vis-a-vis his stand against Islam. So, he was a leader who wanted a unified country. He wanted to unite all communities. But he was also the person who would call a spade a spade. So if he was dealing with radical Islamic leaders, he would be equally critical of them, use strong language, And something that we find, one statement I would like to quote, when there was a debate on making Vande Mataram, the song, the national song for the Congress, and there was a debate how much of it was acceptable and how much is not, whether it annoyed the sensibilities of the Muslim community and all. So here we see Subhash was writing to Jawaharlal Nehru that much of their demands are unreasonable, and these demands are coming from the fundamentalists, from the fanatics in Islam. And if we give in to them, their demands are not going to stop. Demands are going to go on increasing. So he was a very clear-eyed person, not willing or not even in the frame of mind to make somebody happy, to please someone, if that clashed with his own principles and ideas. So he was a devout Hindu, carrying the Gita and the Rosary, the Rudrakshmala everywhere he went, and his meditation was a part of his daily routine. His sadhana was his part of his daily routine, and he was a practicing Hindu, very proud to show it to the outside world. Because I don't know of any other leader who had fought for the rights of the Hindus to do a puja like the Durga Puja and the Saraswati Puja within prisons. He fought with the governments multiple times, both in Burma and in Kolkata. He fought with the government that this is my right. Religion is our life and spirit. It's a living soul. It's not an artificial thing. It's not just another part of our life. It is our living breath. So you cannot force us to compromise on that. And this is something that we will do. Our pujas are sacrosanct. It cannot be compromised. So you have to get it done. So standing up so publicly, standing for his, arguing for his religious rights, the religious rights of his community. Secular leaders today cringe at the thought of speaking out that they are talking or defending a particular faith, particularly the Hindu faith. So they want to show that, they are global citizens and equally belonging to all cultures and all religions. But that is not the case. Subhash Bose argued that we might be global universal citizens, but we still need one place to stand, and that is where we stand. This is where our roots are, and we have to be rooted in our history and culture and our spirituality and civilization and religion. So a very proud Hindu, never hesitant to declare it publicly, and at the same time ready to defend the faiths of everybody around him. So that was Subhash Chandra Bose in a nutshell.
Thank you, Chandrachud. I think Netaji is really a true idol for the younger generation, as well as to, you can stay rooted and do what you like further in your life. I would now go to Miss Aparna Watts. Aparna Watts is the radio presenter at Alive 90.5 FM and one of our biggest supporters as well. Aparna ji, due to the constraints of time, can we just have one question from you, please?
You have no idea what I've been doing to my notes. I've gone and just okay. Sabse pehle to both Anuj ji and Chandrachud ji, this is coming straight from my heart. So I want to say this to you. The work that you have done, there are quite literally no words to thank you. We applaud you and stay forever indebted to you. Generations have been fooled, and now generations will thank you and remember your passion. So thank you.
Thank you. Our pleasure. Thank you.
The question I have for you is, how do we take your words to every single soul in India?
There are many ways. Actually, this is one question that we have started considering seriously and have started giving some serious thought. And there are a few ways that we have come across, that we have decided. And first thing is that we have a considerable body of work, published work, that needs to be taken to the corners. And we have started getting these works, which were primarily in English to start with, getting translated to vernaculars, to all regional languages, primarily Hindi, Bangla, even Marathi to some extent. We are thinking of South Indian languages. Now that I have my book with Penguin, it will be translated to many more languages. So it needs to be taken to various corners, all corners of the country, to different segments of people. Secondly, we both Anuj and I are very active on social media. So there we would request you to stay associated with us, in touch with us, follow us, share our work, what we are doing as much as possible, because social media is the biggest weapon in this day and age. Without social media, we could not have taken, where it's unimaginable, it was unimaginable even 6 years ago to have this kind of discussion meeting on this topic. Social media has made it possible. And technology, we have to thank technology, has made it possible. So we have to utilize technology to the best extent possible. So Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, YouTube, we are active everywhere. And please do get in touch with us on all the platforms and do share what we are writing, what we are saying, what we are trying to do, so that the message goes to everybody. And third thing is, which I had actually requested Bharti ji, and she had very graciously agreed to do it, is that we need resources. We need resources which have to be at another level. I mean, primarily resources of what? Logistical resources. We do talks. We need to do many more talks, at a much higher level in different parts of the countries. We need to go into the universities. We need to get into the institutions and present our findings to every possible platform, academic, non-academic, institutional, non-institutional, influencers, everywhere. We need to get there, and we all have contacts. I mean, you all are very well established in your lives. You all have your own network, your contacts, who can help us open the door. That opening the door bit is extremely critical. It is very, very important. And if those start opening, we can take our message to many, many more places and to many, many more people who can influence decision making. So that's another way. And finally, the other resource that we need, and that we constantly, we have very recently started asking for it, because for many, many years, people had been telling us that we want to contribute financially to the work that we were doing. Now, we didn't have the means, we were not sure whether to do it or not. But now we have reached at a stage where financial resources mean our sustenance. It is absolutely crucial, critical to take the case forward. And it is, I mean, obviously, many people are there, naysayers are there, and there are cynics who say a lot of nasty things. But I mean, the reality of this world is nothing works for free. So even if we have to do a meeting in some city or some event is taking place, we just want to catch a flight and go there, land up there. We want to go and meet somebody, or do a meeting of our own, or call a journalist for a cup of tea, coffee in some good place, whatever. And even taking care of our own families. Like, I'm being a married person, and with kids, I have to take care of my family. So nothing works for free. So financial resources are extremely critical to enable us to give 100% and take this forward. We have been doing that with our own resources, but now we have run out of our own resources. I was in very highly paid jobs, consulting jobs, pushy jobs, but now that I have left all those 3 to 4 years now, there are no resources. There is no backup. So we do need uh, uh, help in the form of financial resources. So I've shared how you can contribute. I've shared it with Bharti ji. I'm sure she will pass it on. But this is how, Aparna ji, these are the few methods, few ways by which you can help take the case forward.
Thank you, Chandrachur. Definitely, I do have the details with me, and I would love to share with every one of you who wanted to contribute towards these efforts. And I think it's a very important cause, and we need to know what our history was so that we won't make any mistakes in future. I think we can now officially launch the book in Australia. Can we please all flash our copies on the windows?
Can I put you all on a gallery mode so that I can take a picture, if you don't mind?
Yes, of course.
Just 1 second. Perfect. Thank you.
Also, for our audience in Sydney, we do have some copies of the book at special prices. So if you want to have one at a very special price, you can have them. I'm also going to put up the details of the books from where you can get them. Ashutosh, can you please allow me to share my screen?
Yes, please. Just give me 1 second. Yeah, go ahead, please.
So, yep. So the copies are now.
Screen is not on.
Yeah. Yeah. So quickly moving on to the vote of thanks. Can we please invite Mr. Yogesh Khattar, the Vice President of AHA, to come and deliver the vote of thanks, please?
Yogesh ji.
जी बहुत बहुत धन्यवाद चंद्रचूड़ जी, अनुज जी, ये हमारा सौभाग्य है। जी आप सुन पा रहे हैं मुझे?
बिल्कुल, बताइए।
जी 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 हाँ, ये आज हमारा सौभाग्य है कि आप हमें समय दिया और अपनी बात को हम इतने बड़े प्लेटफॉर्म पे जो है लेके आए हैं और जागरूक कर रहे हैं। और मैं तो आपका जो है इस तरह से फैन हो गया हूँ कि जैसे हमारे जो सिपाही हैं वो आप हमारे कलम के सिपाही हैं जो एक लड़ाई के लिए निकले हैं और अपनी जान जोखिम में डालकर आप सच्चाई दुनिया को जो है पेश करने जा रहे हैं। तो आपका बहुत बहुत धन्यवाद, आपको सैल्यूट है। और मैं सबसे अपने यहाँ जो ऑस्ट्रेलिया में मेरे साथी हैं अमेंद्र जी और बाकी सब साथियों से निवेदन करूंगा कि इस कॉज में आप सब लोग सपोर्ट कीजिए। आप जितना भी सपोर्ट करेंगे और उनको प्रेरित करेंगे तो ऐसे सच दुनिया के सामने वो ले आएंगे। और मैं आप सबका एक बार फिर से तहे दिल से शुक्रगुजार हूँ, धन्यवाद करता हूँ। और स्पेशल थैंक्स आपके जो अभिभावक हैं, आपके जो शिक्षक हैं और माता पिता हैं, उनको भी मैं धन्यवाद करना चाहूंगा जिन्होंने इतने अच्छे आपको संस्कार दिए। मैं उन सबको अपना शीश झुका के प्रणाम करता हूं और आप सब लोगों का धन्यवाद करता हूं। आपने हमें अपना कीमती समय दिया। धन्यवाद।
बहुत बहुत धन्यवाद आपको।
Thank you all. It was wonderful having you all with us today, and we'll keep meeting in future as well, and hope to see you guys physically here in Australia. And thank you so much for your time.
Thank you for having us. Thank you for releasing the book. It means a lot, and it's an honor. Thank you everyone.
Thank you everyone.
Thank you all. Have a great evening
Thank you.
ahead. Thank you.
You too.